So I just want to start off with a little story here. My son and I were driving back from the gym. We go to the gym every morning and go and work out early in the morning before we start our day. And my son had been just kind of subdued a little bit, and he kind of turns and looks at me and he says, "Dad, do you think I'm ahead of my peers in my learning and in my education?" I said, "In some ways, I think so. I think in the way that you reason, the way that you learn, and then the way you discuss the great books, you have a type of education that uses your logic and your reasoning much more powerfully than what they're accustomed to in the public schools." And he says, and then he turns and looks at me and he says, "Dad, do you think I'm an intellectual giant?" They all call me an intellectual giant. All my friends do. And I said, "Well, they're not, they don't get the kind of education that you get. They don't know how to reason through things. They don't read the great books. They don't have the great ideas. They don't have the great source of knowledge that you do from reading those great books. And so you have a lot of great insights on human character, human behavior, human morality, and how governments form and how governments work, how governments should be structured. And you just know a lot about how the world operates. Their education, on the other hand, is very science and math based. There's a lot of STEM topics, and they get crammed in a conveyor belt method with facts. Whereas you're being taught to think freely, think openly, and to reason and to develop insights and to read something and to pull out insights to extract it. Where on the other hand, their education is very passive, and they're just being force fed facts and knowledge, and they're not being required to gain understanding. They're not being required to develop wisdom and putting things into practical application as well as high theoretical thought. They're just not required to do that in the public school system. So you kind of have this advantage over them, and they recognize that in the way that you communicate and the way that you share. And it produces a powerful effect upon their minds when they see you being able to pull out insights and be able to talk about deep and heavy topics with ease. And so that's why they call you the intellectual giant. And it's not because you are, it's just because they're lacking the education that you've gotten. And really, anyone could have that type of education if they had a liberal arts education, they had a classical education, if they read the great books, they could be in the same position as you. And I know you don't consider yourself a great scholar or a great student or anything, but anyone can have a high level of intelligence and reasoning by having this type of education. So having the right type of education makes all of the difference.